A report out this morning is expected to accuse the National Health Service of being institutionally racist. If the leaks are to be believed, it's just the latest institution to be accused. So is the problem limited to just a few parts of society, or is society in general failing to deal with a multiracial culture? Joining me now in the studio is Imran Khan, the lawyer who represented the Lawrence family during the Macpherson inquiry into racism in the Metropolitan Police. And also here is Shirin Aguiar, who is the senior reporter at The Voice newspaper. Imran, you've been through, as I said, the Macpherson inquiry, and now there's been this one about a black man who died whilst in a mental institution. Are we going to keep having inquiries into specific locations and incidents until we come up to the real issue, and that is that there is a problem of racism in the community at large?
I'm afraid so. What Macpherson did in the inquiry was say it's not just the police, there are other institutions and society in general. We're dealing with a society where we've had slavery, and over decades and centuries we've had policies and practices built up, and what we're now seeing is that being exposed time and time again. What my concern is that it takes a death for that to come out. We've been, as campaigners, as lawyers, been saying that there are too many black young men in mental institutions and something's going to happen. Unfortunately, in this case, something has happened. So yes, we are going to have inquiries in the future. There may be other schools, further education, other institutions, all of which at some point in time are going to have to put their hands up and say, yep, institutional racism exists. But I can't just finish on this point, because what's important is that there's a fear that by branding an institution as institutional racist, you're saying that everybody is racist within that organization. That's wrong. That's not what Sir William Macpherson was talking about. What he's saying is that policies and practices, unwitting, something you haven't thought about, produces an outcome which is discriminatory. So it's not just branding everybody, it's the policies and practices. And I think that's important to remember.
Shirin, you're a journalist. I mean, do you accept that there is a problem of definitions? Because some would argue not that the problem doesn't exist, but institutional racism, this was the raging debate under Macpherson, doesn't actually mean anything to ordinary people whose attitudes and views you are trying to influence. Is it sloppy language?
I don't think it's sloppy language. I mean, it's language that we've been hearing now for 10 years since the publication of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, which was in fact 5 years ago. But, you know, at the end of the day, the NHS and other institutions have got to be accountable. They've got to be held accountable, you know, for failures. And that has not been the case in the case of, you know, black mental health patients for over 2 decades.
When the Macpherson inquiry was completed, there was a whole raft of very specific recommendations that he made, and to the best of my knowledge, and you will immediately correct me if I'm wrong, the vast majority, if not all of them, were immediately embraced by the government, and then slightly more slowly by the Metropolitan Police.
Yes, the government said we're not necessarily taking all of them on. Let's be clear about that. What they've said, that we have issues with some of these. I mean, they are now trying to implement, for example, double jeopardy and so on. I don't want to get into detail. There were 70 recommendations in total.
And let me stop you, because that was precisely the point. Because the first recommendation of this inquiry into the death of David Bennett is that there should be ministerial acknowledgement of the presence of institutional racism in the mental health service and a commitment to eliminate it. So the first thing, as it were, that should occur today, if this is to mean something, is that John Reid or one of his ministerial colleagues should stand up and say, yes, we accept that and there's a problem. How likely is that?
It's got to happen. If it doesn't happen, then there's a failure by this government. The inquiry was set up to look into it, and it's got to accept that recommendation. What Sir William Macpherson said is, before you even start changing an institution, you've got to acknowledge, accept, and recognize that institutional racism exists. And that means the most senior person in the job to put his hand up and say, yes, it occurs, it's here, now we've got to do something about it. Once you've recognized that it's there, it's easy to change. When you're sticking your head in the sand and ignoring it, nothing's going to change. And unfortunately, if that is going to happen, we may yet see more deaths in the future, as unpalatable that seems.
Sure. Shirin Aguiar, are you concerned that the reality of what happened to David Bennett, which was that he was restrained, and I think it's accepted within the report he was restrained for too long, the treatment of him appears to have been physically very rough, that there are men and women who are carrying out such practices, and yet what we're really saying about this is institutional racism. We're giving it a very big umbrella. Isn't there a stronger argument to really get down to the detail of this particular case? Might that be lost in all of this?
Well, I hope it won't be lost, because exactly the same thing happened with another black mental patient, Orville Blackwood, over 13 years ago, and there were very strong recommendations made after that inquiry, which have not resulted in, which have not given us results.
Sure.
And so, at the end of the day, yes, whilst there are people, every day who go about their jobs, there has to be accountability at the top. It has to filter down through the system.
Okay, well, we shall hear the result and the publication when it comes, and we shall be having our ears wide open for what Dr. John Reid and his colleagues have to say about it. For the time being, Imran Khan and Shirin Aguiar, thank you very much indeed for coming in.